And hello, and welcome to AleksConnects Creative Sandbox. My name is Alex, and let's continue our Fanart project Angry Birds vs Transformers. Yes, let's continue. Switch to... Yes. This is something that OBS constantly doing. I don't know why, maybe because there's a lot of layers in here, and it kinda makes things dark and then shines them out again. Okay, let's just make sure that everything is working. Timer set, 2 hours. Okay, so... Got super distracted. Remember that I didn't post any videos on YouTube as I kinda wanted, so... like 15 minutes ago, just remember it, so that's why I kinda a little bit. Yep, unfocused. So it's time to focus, So today we're going to continue, of course, work on our illustration. So previously, like throughout the previous session, that was pretty strange session. Like half of the session I just went through some type of a dilemma. By the way, I called it like psychological problems, but of course it's not real psychological problems. Like I'm not like talking about some type of a diseases, the diseases like of your mind and brain. For the most part, when I'm talking about psychological problems, I mean like the small problems. If you're going to ignore them, they could develop in something bigger, of course, but for the most part, like just not to confuse things, because again, English is not my native language, so it's pretty strange when I'm trying to portray a particular thing, so still need to adjust. So previously I kinda went through some type of a planning. We actually tried to plan our future things, so like what we're going to do next. And again, ideally I would want to start working on final sketch or so-called final line art probably somewhere in Saturday, Sunday. That means that in 3 days, for the most part, today is like, for me again, it's already a new day started, but for the most part we have like 3 days, 6th, 7th and 8th. 3 days to actually finish this stage and finally go into the next stage. So in order to actually make sure that I will be ready for that, I think I'm not going to talk that much, at least I'm not planning to. If I'm going to talk more than draw or paint, then I guess we have to accept this. But hope I'm not going to talk that much, because again, we need to do a lot of things. So previously, for the most part, we worked on these things. Just can go so this was at the beginning just flat values. This is just like some type of understanding and establishing the darkest darks and lightless lights. Of course it's too much. I think when we actually add different colors in shadow areas, they are going to be definitely different, and add a lot of casting shadows, everything is going to look a little bit differently. But for now, let's go with this one. And throughout the session, I'm going to try to, again, just go through this again, just see what's right, what's wrong. Then, if everything is kind of works at this point, we're actually going to establish casting shadows finally. Like, again, I don't have that many experience in casting shadows, but again, I have like the theory how you would actually approach casting shadows for the most part, or usually. So I just going to try to make sense of this theory that I you know and try to see if it's going to work or not. And it's not my theory, of course. It's the theory of one of the artists. Don't remember, by the way. Probably Scott Robinson. Yes, probably Scott Robinson or Robertson. Let's search it. Yeah, Scott Robertson is the awesome artist, like who actually wrote a lot of cool books with his associates, and in the end, like, for the most part, I'm going to use his theory. I think he actually presented this theory of halfway to black. So if you're trying to establish some type of a casting shadow, you need to like pick an original value, or original, let's just go with the black and white. You need to take a local value of the subject on which this casting shadow is going to be casted. So for instance, if shadow is going to be casted on this part, we need to, on our floor, which for the most part is, we need to take the middle value of this, or the local value of this subject, and then just go halfway to black. So since this is a black, we need to go halfway. We need to divide 20 in 2, and this is going to be like 10 is going to be the result of our casting shadows. Of course, it works only if you only in direct light, because in direct light, of course, shadows are a little bit more prominent, so they actually going to probably look like this if there is only a direct light. But if we actually add a lot of area light and a lot of diffused light, is going to affect this shadow. Of course, it's going to be a little bit lighter. So that's why kind of working with casting shadows, as I said, it's problematic when you have a lot of light sources. When you have, of course, only one light source, it's manageable. But as long as as soon as you're actually adding a lot of different lights that could affect this casting shadow and make it appear lighter than it is, it kind of makes things a little bit problematic. But again, at the end, the good thing is, we still want to start from something simple. So since we have here some type of a direct light in the form of this spotlight which shines from the ceiling, I think we could depict our casting shadows by this rule halfway to black and actually see how it's going to work. I just need to make sure if I'm properly explaining it. So let's open my notes and see if this is actually how this rule works. As I remember properly, yes, that's it, but I just want to make sure. I don't want to feed you in with any disinformation. So lights, yeah, I have super big notes. There's hard to find something that quickly. By the way, for notes I'm using mind maps. I already showed you my examples of mind maps and some called intellectual maps. At least in Russia they called intellectual maps, but throughout the world I guess they call just mind maps. Yeah, so the same concept Scott Robertson has presented is 1, 2, 3 read. It's when you have to create a good gradations of gray when, again, one part needs to be separated from other and from the third part. And why is 1, 2, 3 read? Because for the most part we are going to see only 3 parts of the subject, depending on how the subject is going to be shown in the camera. For instance, let's just make a quick example on the cube. For instance, it's not going to be accurate cube, but still. So if we're going to, for instance, imagine the cube, as we can see only three parts of this cube. And depending on where this light source is coming from, this cube is going to be either lit up on top and be super dark in here, half tone in here, and of course the lighter shadow is going to be here. I'm kind of working with this much brush, that's why it looks super awful. We're going to go into extremes. Yeah, for the most part we're going to see only the parts that in the light, the parts in the half shadow, and the parts in the dark. For the most part we're actually going to see only 3 sides for every object, no matter how we are going to place it, because this is how things working. If we're going to see on this object from the top, no difference, or from the bottom, this is how this object is going to look from the bottom, of course. A little bit differently, but still. So this part is going to be in shadow, depending where the light is actually shining. Let's put it from here. This is going to be the light side, or actually half tone, because probably the light side is going to be on top and we're not going to see it. And this is going to be half tone too, but a little bit lighter. Of course this one is going to be much darker. But again, all depends on what's under the surface. Maybe there's a reflective light that will make it a little bit lighter. So no matter from what angle we're going to see like our subjects, for the most part we're going to see them in 3 basic from 3 basic angles, either from bottom, one side and the other side, or from of course considering if we're actually seeing this object in a 3/4 view. If we are going to try to see this object only like from the front or from the back, of course it's a little bit different, but still, if there's some type of a 3/4 view presentation, like we're looking at the object from 3 sides, we're going to see only 3 parts of this object. Of course it's getting more complex if we're working with different type of objects, with the complex objects, because we could see, for instance, I don't know, there's objects that or subjects that's designed the way that we could see different planes. We could see part of the bottom planes and part of the top planes, but to simplify, by talking on the simple cube, of course, usually we could see only 2 or 3. It kind of simplifies things, and basically 1-3 read is all 3 parts, like main parts of your subject, needs to be properly separated in contrast. They just have to have a controllable contrast. It all depends on what light conditions you're having. Like you could go flat and choose a slight separation between 1-3 read, or good separation. But of course Scope Robertson, for the most part, talking about the ideal division between 1-3 read, which will read the best. But again, unfortunately, it's not going to work in every condition, because depending on what on lighting that we're actually setting our environment and subjects in this environment, things could become pretty flat. And as an artist, of course, we need to make them read properly, but if we want to depict realism, sometimes subjects are flat. Yeah, so this is something that I definitely need to learn. Like, I still looking at building these things a little bit like robotic. I'm still trying to look at them as, I don't know, like, I know particular things and I'm going to use these rules to create a particular like environment that has to be depicted specific way as in reality. So for instance, again, by determining the light sources in their particular positions, I'm going to do my best to present every object and subject in these particular circumstances that I depicted from them, for them. So light from here, like area light from here, spotlight from the top, and 4 light sources, weak light sources from 4 sides. Of course, with controlled intensity to make them. This one is going to be. I'm going to have the most intensity. It is going to shine here. This one less, and this one even less. So yeah, so for me, I'm still like, I know that for the most part artists are going to make the best contrasts possible in their work, and for the most part, if they're experienced enough, they're going to ignore light conditions and they're going to make light conditions work on them, like, but for now I'm still feeling controlled by a particular light conditions. I still don't have enough experience to change how things look. That's why for now I'm going to stick to the light conditions that I depicted for myself. And if things are not going to look good, maybe intuitively I will decide to change something to make this 1, 2, 3 read ideal. But for now, it's not the case. I'm just going to try things my way, and then we'll see what's going to what I'm going to get out of this. Again, as I like to say, like walking my own journey or creating my own path, not just walking on the path of others, just gaining your own experience. Not necessarily by swimming against the current, but just make it how you would like to make it, not as people say to you how to make it. So, but still consider this as, of course, the possibility. Yeah, so basically this 1, 2, 3 read is presented by Scott Robertson 2 and Robertson 2, and of course the thing with the shadows, it works yeah, halfway to black, as I said, works exactly that. So take the local value of the subject or surface and determine value halfway to black. That's kind of it. That way we could determine a cast shadows and the shadows for these subjects. For instance, this so-called self shadow. I don't know, in Russia we call it like some kind of self shadow. So it's the shadow of the object or subject. That's why it kind of yeah, I'm going to call it just shadow, because we have, it's actually called core shadow, probably core shadow. Maybe it's called core shadow. Let's see, because I cannot remember it. So core shadow. Yeah, I think it's actually called core shadow. Let's, by the way, well, remember, put this in my notes because it's important. I'm constantly working on my intellectual maps and notes and changing them and working on them, making them much clearer and clearer with every new information that I'm getting. For now, it's kind of mixed up. It's halfway in Russian, halfway in English. So before I'm going to show these notes to you, of course, they need to be like prepared. For now, it's kind of a mess that only I understand. So that's why for now I'm going to just talk about them, but not show them. So okay. Yeah, so let's start with the casting shadows. So again, if you don't know how casting shadows are created, they're created actually pretty simple. We just need to draw, we need to know the direction of the light source that we're working with. And so this is the rays of light for this shadow, and then just create lines, like, I don't know, and see where they intersect, and then just create a cast shadow in the places that these lines could intersect. It's like, in theory, of course, it's super easy, but when you're trying to do this, like, actually by constructing them, it could be a pretty hard thing to do, because you need to think about, you need to understand the form and where these rays of light actually will cut the form by creating a terminator in here, for instance. And in the terminator zones, light is basically cutting itself and creates a casting shadows in the places that light is just basically not receiving. Wait. So I'm not going to create these casting shadows like by constructing them, because I'm going to try to construct them in my mind and figure out how they're going to look like. Just, although I probably should construct them, I don't know, but we're definitely going to construct them on this separate layer, because this is like definitely it. Let's call it basic, and first pass basic, and this is going to be forced cast shadow. Casting, not just cast shadows. Just take something that will represent cast shadows the best way. What if we actually take a color? No, let's just go with pure white. Again, casting shadows, not super easy. In theory, they're easy to build, but when you actually dive into actual, like, construct way of putting them on surfaces, it becomes a little bit complicated. And the problem is, probably the worst way or the hardest way to work with casting shadows, when you need to create casting shadows, casting shadows for these particular like objects, the complex objects. We need to cast these shadows on not just flat surface, but on a particular surface, and that makes things super hard. For the most part, I think most of the artists just basically faking them, because if you're going to construct it properly, it's going to take you, I don't know, hours and hours and hours. So yeah, that's why it's kind of usually easy. It's much easier to fake casting shadows like this. So I don't know if this shadow actually placed this way, but I assume that it is. Like, for instance, I don't know if this shadow actually placed this way right here, because I'm not actually constructing it, but I assume that it's here. So yes, not, no, I don't know. Nope, I think not. So yeah, something like this. So first I think yeah, it's definitely a hard thing to do. So because for the custom shadows, first we need to determine probably the height of every part that's going to create these shadows, to understand where these shadows are going to be placed. Where chalk in depth? It's kinda in here, but it seems closer. Casting shadows will actually help us to create, like, properly depict where the chalk is. Okay, let's assume that one custom shadow in here. Reason why I don't want to go with the complete black, because we have a lot of black. Maybe I should. Let's try it. Let's add filter mask and go with invert. Not the filter mask itself. Then I will just make things a little bit better. Seriously, like, it's pretty hard even to fake them properly. Is this the area that's going to create this part? Okay, this is supposedly going to be a cast shadow for this helmet. It makes it grounded. Also, we're going to have a definite cast shadow somewhere in here. And again, his black is going to be somewhere in here. Again, I'm just assuming, because I can't even imagine how I could construct them. Like, I know that in order to construct them you need to, like, understand where the terminator is, then create a line that, like, cuts this terminator in a particular space, and then when these areas are intersected, like when this line is going to meet, this is going to be the point when casting shadow, like the edge for the casting shadow. But again, I don't want to get too technical on this yet, because there's pretty complex things are here, for me at least, to create all these casting shadows. So there's a lot of core shadows inside the objects that is going to work. This shadow again casted by chalk, Hopefully it's going to look this way. Actually, maybe it's going to be in here, so we're barely going to see it. So his back, for the most part, is going to be not visible on the floor. It's going to be casted. Actually, it's much easier to create cast shadows when direct light shines somewhere in here, because that way shadow are pretty distorted, and you kind of just draw in silhouette of the object and then connecting it. That's kind of it. That way cast shadows are actually going to look appropriate, but when you're having this type of direction, it doesn't create any casting shadows, and it's actually much harder to build. You have to do less work, but most of these things are casted pretty strangely, in a strange way, and you just don't know where to properly place them. So you tell me that there's no casting shadows for the most part in here that's going to be visible. It's just going to be present only on this part. So it turns out that we're actually not going to see casting shadows in here, because again, we're not going to see them. They're going to be partially we could see it somewhere in here. That's why working with them in blue and white kind of makes more sense, to actually see the separations where they are placed. Let's, by the way, do that now with white. So, okay, one casting shadows created in here. This part is going to be in the shadow for the most part. Under the table. Okay, right here, it actually going to become smaller. Then it casts itself almost in the same angle. So this is where the problems of creating a tangents. I need to be careful, because tangents of course are applied even for shadows, the edges of cast shadows intersecting with subjects of the scene. They're actually integral compositional elements, and you need to work with them considering the composition. So this is actually part of the helmet. Okay. So then this casting shadows kind of goes over Quintessa and her form. It's going to be created by this terminator, just by this edge, and going to be casted pretty close. The same actually goes for this one. That means that cast shadow is not going to be created by this edge, it's actually under the table, but by this edge, that's, yeah, so that means that this part actually going to be in shadow, and this part too, because again, table, it's not a cloth, it's not curved this way. The only reason why I actually curved this one inside, like under the table because I wanted to showcase the part of the Quintessa's face. But this, again, part is going to be for the most part in shadow. The only way why I actually did it is to more light to receive this. This actually doesn't look right. Table looks this way, but right here so we kind of have to have the same. Yep. Again, we don't have to go like 100% right, but as long as it looks believable. Again, this part is actually going to now dominate the shadow, casting shadow with the tablecloth. This part actually going to be a little bit under. Yeah, I probably started my like these streams from pretty complex illustration. Like for the first illustration of this caliber, choosing this type of a complex illustration was not a good idea, because there's a lot of things that I don't feel comfortable about. Like every freaking step, I wish that I had more experience in these things. But again, you have to learn somewhere. You have to start somewhere, so why not? Why not? Right. Let's, by the way, make areas with the cast shadows or clear, much clearer. By the way, that means that this area is going to be in the cast shadow too. Of course. The reason why I want to do this is just to, we always could erase these parts. Just need to understand where light is hitting and where not. Where is not, because if I'm actually going to leave this one black, it's just not clear, not that light. Just confusing for brain. Again, these areas are completely in the dark. Of course, we could like work with their transparency to make them appear less. But now it actually looks like actual cast shadow. Oh snap. Forgot about one important thing. I think we need to make this shadow actually a little bit deeper in direction here, because what I forgot that this thing actually placed behind the transformers. So this light actually shines like from this angle. It appears like it's going to intersect and create shadow in here for this part, but actually not. It's going to be even deeper because this light actually shines from somewhat, I don't know, to properly, yeah, like from this direction. It's a little bit tilted. So that's why I need to keep this in mind. Let's just keep this one. And since this light actually goes from this direction, it means that it kind of goes a little bit deeper in here. So yeah, shadows are deeper. It's actually good because it will make Odessa more vivid or visible on the table. Just the whole point of placing the light source the way that I placed it. I just completely forget about it. Okay, this part created in here. That means that this part actually placed a little bit deeper too. So is this. We're almost not going to see it. Arms and beak, everything in here. Needs to be a little bit deeper in space because direction is different. Yeah, definitely struggling. Like, again, every time that I am losing control of what I'm doing in terms of that I don't have a specific formula how to do this, and the only way is just to paint and see how it's going to look. I'm always I don't feel that good about it. Like, and I understand that not everything in your creative process you can control, but again, I can't help it. It's just something that bugs me. And usually shadows are going to be wider. The further they go, the wider they get. So this part is going to be wider in the shadow, or bigger in the shadow. But it all depends how light it shines though. Sometimes it goes like this. Sometimes it goes like this. If light source is here, then it goes like this. If light source is far, it probably works almost parallel. But it's too far. But if it's too far, it just makes cast shadows shrinking. Let's see. Oh yeah, oh yeah. yeah, working with casting shadows super hard thing to do though, especially when you have a lot of like one object on the other object, and when you need to cast shadows on other subjects, it's super complex. Like ideally, like when you're working just on creating a specific character, it's not that hard, because these type of shadows, they are actually created pretty easily. For instance, this one could be a cast shadows for the hand. This is casting shadow for the beak. This is casting shadow for the eyebrows. When you're working with like creating casting shadows for characters, it's not that hard thing to do, like, because we get accustomed to them. We seeing how casting shadows are displayed with the particular light conditions on people, because we not noticing them. But when it comes to these complexities, it's not something that we are getting that accustomed to. So okay, this one could be that deep actually. I don't know, maybe it's just like kind of goes there. And goes kind of inside. Yeah, because light actually shines here, we could see more helmet. But this part's still probably going to be in the shadow. Okay. Horse Cortez is a little bit complex, more complex than I depicted her in here. Whew, this is super crazy. So how about this one? Because partially, right here, shadows are not going to be pre-created because it kind of cuts somewhere in here. So for the most part, everything in here kind of a cast shadow. It cuts partially the bubbles. So you tell me everything in here in the shadow. Guess it is. Okay, this part not necessarily. Actually going to be partially probably lit up slightly. Again, this is going to be diffused spotlight, like it's actually going to be a little bit softer, but still for now I just want to establish where these lines are going to be present. Of course we're going to have drop shadows in here, but for these things they are considerably small. We could depict them in their drop shadows. Drop shadows, cast shadows, call them whatever it's more understandable for you. Of course, shadows from here definitely going to create dark parts in here. I'm not going to dive into small casting shadows. We're going to work on small casting shadows on rendering stages, because right now they're just not going to be visible enough. That's it. Like, they will probably create an overall feeling though. We could like slightly make them present. This one is going to be a little bit smaller because the plate on the top is smaller. Just going to, again, so every ray of light is going to cut and create a shadow in this area. So the only area of this stand is going to be lit up is this one, this one, this one, and this one. The rest, for the most part, is going to be in shadow. That's why we kind of... Okay, this is actually going to be lit up. Okay. Ideally, I would want to create for them too, these drop shadow area. Let's just, by the way, try to do that, because it will make our characters a little bit more appealing, I'd say. Or it will add depth to them, definitely. This is something that we probably should do. Add depth to them. Okay, this one for the most part actually is going to be in light. There's not that many cast shadows are going to be present. The cast shadow for this hand is definitely going to be here. Or for the wing. Question is, then it kind of goes somewhere in here, you say? There's the problem. Just light goes in here. And it actually creates a... It actually doesn't create that big of a shadow. It kind of starts here, then it kind of cuts, gets smaller and smaller, and then... Yeah, I think that's this. Just coming down. Again, from the far, it could look decent. By the way, I'm working with the 50 opacity. It's kind of cool. Let's make it 75. Again, the core shadow, I'm not considering the core shadows. All the core shadows, again, they are actually a part of the... But no. If I'm going to considering core shadows, I'm just going to mix things up and not good. By the way, in some places I already probably covered the core shadows, which was a mistake. Also, don't know how this part actually. Ideally, I don't want to ground it. I want to ground this part to make it look good, and for now it's just kind of out of place. Either I need to add some type of shadow in here. I don't know, to make it right, or I don't even know, or slight presence of shadow in here. But of course I need to be careful with it. Now at least it's grounded, because like it's almost like it's in space and just floating. We don't want this feeling. Actually, this type of shadow could be created, because again, since light in here is kind of diffused, it will partially create this shadow in here, definitely. It's just not going to be that visible. And of course, this thing, we definitely need to establish depth of this thing, because it's definitely going to be deeper. The whole thing about this is something that I definitely need to establish later. All these things are actually going to be considerably dark, because they're not going to receive that much light. We could actually make them darker, because right now they're so light that it's just not working. Because they definitely need to be dark in particular areas. Okay, how about these? So when it comes to direct light, creating casting shadows, moderatively understandable. So you just like again put in the ray of light, seeing when the area that this light cuts off, and then seeing where this light getting through. This area of course stay lit up, and the areas that light is not getting through, going to be on them, it's going to be created like cast shadow. It's relatively easy for these type of like objects and subjects, but when we're working of course with these, it's pretty quickly becomes super complicated, because they form is much harder and to properly depict and understand where these zones are actually just assume that this part actually is going to be lit up, although it's highly unlikely, but still let's hope for it. Okay, again, this is pretty good division. It's actually no. These are the casting. These are the core shadows. This core shadow is going to be darker because it's cuts by light. I just going to depict a zone when this light is going to be cut away. I'm not going to. The same I think we need to do for these guys. No, these are actual shadows, casting shadows created by hands, so these are need to be present. The same goes for the beak, for brows, for this. For this, for these, but I kind of already depicted them because they are dark enough to be represented as the core shadows. That's kind of it, I think. When it comes to this area, I will go back and rethink things, definitely. So I don't think that this is the final. In final render we will actually work on them a little bit better. So right now I'm just assuming where they're placed, but on final render these shapes are going to be designed well, placed better, because again these things are probably sometimes even look out of perspective, so we're going to work on their proper placements and etc. So there's a lot of things that are going to go into this. So for casting shadow in here, I think it's slightly going to be present here. Definitely going to be present here, and definitely going to go somewhere in the back. And probably partially it's going to be visible even on the wall. Because again, these shadows are for the most part are going to be created by the reflection of this light on the top. Since this is spotlight, it's almost doesn't affect our these things in here. I don't know, it kinda going to affect them this way, and it actually, I don't know, it's strange. The same, like, I actually have had trouble in here to depict properly. Like, part of me wants to create it, cast the shadow on the actual wall, but the problem is there's no light that could create this. So I could assume that this light hitting in here, and then somehow reflecting there, but nope, it's not. So that means that if the only light that could create shadows for these, because again this light is too far to create shadows for these, for the most part they're not going to be present. This light is dominant enough to cover every shadow that could be created by this light. So for instance, if this light will create some shadow for this one, it's going to be barely visible, because this light is kind of making this shadow super diffused and we're not going to see it for the most part. Although I could depict somewhat of shadow thing, like it actually will look better if I'm going to create these shadows in here. Again, they're going to be barely visible, but the fact that I'm going to create them, it's actually going to help us to work with form. The only thing, I guess, when it comes down to casting shadows, they have to make sense. You can't put like casting shadows just because they look good. They have to be believable, because human eye is pretty good on pointing out particular things, and like especially nonsense. And if we're actually seeing nonsense, we are going to like completely point it out, like, oh come on, this is a nonsense, it can't be like this, I don't know what's happening, but it's nonsense. So casual viewer will point out these things, so we need to be careful to not create this strange and weird things. In order to do this, of course, we need to, oh come on, I'm working with the eraser. Different form. So yeah, it's kind of always a balance between what works for you, like as an artist, and what's going to be and basically things have to make sense. Because if you have light source from right here and you're going to create cast shadow right here, like what? It doesn't make any sense. Light shines in here, it's supposed to create shadow in here. Why the heck shadow is in here? So just stay away probably of these type of nonsensic things. That's why it's a good thing to try to analyze how these lights are going to affect cast shadows for every object in the scene. So for instance, when we're talking about the sword, for the most part, I'm going to think that the only light that could actually affect this sword and create pretty soft shadow for it is again this highlight. But again, since this, or not highlight, but spotlight, but since this spotlight actually doesn't shine in here, and I can't necessarily create shadows like this, I need to think something like, I don't know. Or maybe we actually need to consider the fact that chunks of light are actually going to go through these areas and create shadows. So that means that this one probably could just go perpendicular. This one creates slight variation in shadow, but again, it's not going to be on the wall definitely. These things will create specific shadows in the specific areas, but again, they're going to be pretty limited. I'm not covering the core shadow. Again, there's going to be a so-called casting shadow from this one, but it's just the core shadow of this one, so the top part. So just something like this. Just basically point out that they are present, they are there. The same goes for the for the most part, if shadows are relatively close, they actually will repeat the form. But this form actually is going to be a little bit shifted. So for instance, we see this one is a little bit shifted. And ideally I could shift it even more, but it's going to be shifted less the higher it's going to, how do you properly say it? It all depends on the angle. So when you start, for instance, shadows are like this, like this, like this. Oh, no. You need to make them white because they're not visible. Huh? I don't know. It's pretty weird. Of course, it looks too dark. Makes things super strange. We need to keep it to 35. Again, these shadows are going to be so suggestive. Like they're not going to create a clear and proper depiction of these of the actual shadows. There's just going to be a suggestion that they are present. I don't think that they're going to be super realistic though. going to look exactly the way they have to. Of course, they're not going to be like this exactly. In some areas where the form is further from the wall, it's actually shadows are going to be different. Yes, so this is actually inaccurate. This is inaccurate too. It has to go like this. But that way, kind of shadows looks not cool. Super dilemma. What the heck is this? What's happening? How these lines are created, please tell me. This is magic. I think it's a glitch. Because it's not present when we're working with maybe it's a problem with mask itself. Like, the part of me understands that these shadows are kind of created by this light, and they're actually going to... So this statue is super hard to depict shadows for, because it's kind of in the middle of this light and our most dominant light, and it kind of makes things a little bit 50-50. Like, partially you want to create this in here, that way we'll make this drop shadow longer, and it's probably going to be created somewhere in here. The same goes for this one. But at the same time, it's gonna to soften this shadow, and then we'll create an inner shadow from this light. Double shadows are super confusing, like double casting shadows that actually casted by separate objects or different light sources. They are super confusing. So this area that I created, like, it's just where the shadows are separated. Presumably, I don't know. Let's hope that I'm right. If not, at least we're going to do our best to depict this the right way. Again, one shadow is going to be in here, and the other shadow in here. It's just going to intersect. It's not necessarily going to work for this one, because again, we could depict some slight hint that the shadow actually in here. This will make this area pretty dark. And this one is going to be a little bit lighter. This one probably not. We're not going to see cast shadows for this one. There's going to be a lot of, although we could probably right here could be created a custom shadow from this one in here. Cast shadow in here, but for the most part, this part either way is going to be super dark, so these casting shadows are not going to do justice to this part. Just going to confuse with, yeah, there's already complete darkness there for the most part. But we still could see a separation. Like, this is complete black, this is not. I'm not talking about like actually depicting values for them. I'm not using, of course, the halfway to black rule, because for now I just need to establish where these cast shadows placed. It's much easier to actually call them drop shadows for some reason. Like, at least you're not confusing them with casting, whatever. So casting shadows is just basically an operation, and cast shadows is how they called subjectively, and I guess, and casts shadow, it's when something is cast shadow. The angle of this wall a little bit different, so we're not going to achieve the same result. Probably shadows are going to be a little bit deeper, and not every shadow is going to be that visible. Okay, shadow for this one is going to be like super strangely far. It's pretty close to the light source. Again, this is area light, kind of shines. For the most part, it creates shadow in here, so that means that they actually have to lie somewhere in here. And shadow for this robot actually needs to go somewhere in here. And maybe they're not going to be present on the walls at all. This is something that I definitely need to consider. No, they actually have to stay pretty close to the walls, I think. They're actually kind of falling, and I completely understand this because I made this wall tilted and I needed to make these statues to look tilted too. It kind of actually created this strange feeling that they're actually falling, which is the exact feeling that I want to depict, because it, like, not the fact that they're falling, but the fact that they are creating some type of a suspense or tension. And by the way, I will make them a little bit like straighter in terms of for them not to fall by straightening up their legs a little bit. But again, this is going to be edited in the final design. Again, I don't know. Definitely feel what again? Mixed up colors. partially they have to be at the wall. Their shadows have to be in the wall. Lens shades from the top too, so they're actually going to be cut away a little bit higher, lower. And for these I created shadows. For the most part, kind of it. It still looks super weird in places. Of course, after we're going to add a actual like core shadows, everything is going to look a little bit better. But still, at least these things are not floating in space now, which is a good thing. What if I erase these? I don't think they'll know that these are going to be created. Slight shadows could be created in these areas, but not in these areas. What? Yeah, I'm erasing. Yeah, I don't think they're not going to be here. Kind of looks super strange. They just don't work. From where this line? So you tell me that that's why. So I just basically created something on the filter mask. That's where this line coming from. I kind of knew it, but I thought that I remember that I'd drawn something in the actual mask. Oh, not good. No. Messed up with the filter again. Just erase this line from existence. Go back to the filter and erase this. Whew. Working with cast shadows, it's not easy thing to do, especially when you don't have like the full, I wouldn't say understanding, but like I understand how cast shadows are created, like, but the thing that I'm having problem with is the fact that I have too many light sources, and if I'm going to think about like only creating like particular shadows for like only for each of these light sources separately, it's not a hard thing to do, because again, this light is just going to create probably these long shadows that are going to be in here. Partially, since this is area light, the shadow is actually going to be present probably in here somewhere, I don't know, but we're not going to see these long shadows in here because this light just basically fades away the closer it gets to here, to this area. So that means that we're not going to see these big shadows from these robots, transformers. So same goes for these, it's just going to be fade away. And also we don't have places to actually show them, so I could show it in here, but again, it's just going to be fade away. But at the same time, I definitely need to establish some type of a shadow in between the actual statue and the wall itself. No matter from where light is shining, there's still going to be something super soft, like soft cast shadows present in there. Because again, it kind of works like occlusion. The closer the subjects to each other, the darker the area is. So for instance, if we're going to put one in here, one cube in here. Now let's just assume that this is a wall. Maybe we need to draw it in 3/4 view to be more understandable. So yeah, this is 3/4 view. This is our statue, and this is our wall. See through. And this is our wall. Don't mind the wrong perspective, whatever, we're not going to bother about it. So yeah, this is the wall W. So this is the statue and this is the wall. No matter from where light actually hits, yes, it's going to lit up these areas, but they're not going to be that lit up. We're still going to see a little bit of shadow from this statue. So okay, it will probably go in here, it will probably go in here, but then it kind of reflects, like bounce, but then we're still going to have some type of shadow area in here, no matter what. And the closer these subjects are, it's going to be super super soft shadow, but it's still going to be present. And the closer these subjects are, less light this distance is going to receive, and at the end they're just going to look complete dark. Like there's just going to be pretty close to occlusion, like it's a one object and there's just a separation in here that there's no light hitting there. Consider this one complete black, because yeah, that's why I'm kind of having trouble with this. So definitely shadow is going to be present in here, but it's going to be super soft. Actually could create softness, why not? Let's just depict softness, it's just for the sake of. But we need to be careful with this, because let's be super careful. So yeah, we're barely going to see it. Of course, if I'm going to go into 50%, it's going to be even less present. Because there's a lot of light hitting there, but which kind of could assume that it's not going to be received that well by. Oh no, don't want to create gradations. What's happening? What's happening? So now this is eraser. Oh, come on. Again, there's going to be present, but it's going to be super soft. Yeah, I can't make it super soft, it's still going to look strange. It's the wrong brush for it. Ideally, blur brush would be ideal for this. Oh, come on. Just created strange thing in here. This one's just the blender one with a texture. We could use it. Nope, doesn't look right. I think you got it. Like, just for some reason right here it worked, but right here it doesn't. Oh, because we need to barely press it, I guess. Nope. Whatever, I think it's, yeah, some type of a soft shadow is definitely going to be present in here, but again, it's going to be super soft. Okay, let's find a blur brush. I don't know, or just a blending. Smudge soft, not the way. Yeah, the water one. Water one. Good. So we'll barely see it. Barely see it. I actually need to. I definitely will create my favorite brushes that I constantly going to use, like for the most part. We definitely need to create some type of a, how do you properly call it, the palette with brushes. Call it my main brushes that I usually could use, but I'm going to like create this palette on rendering stage. Right now, of course, I'm not rendering, but again, the cool thing is, like, by doing this stage, I'm kind of already getting closer to these things. What could actually soften in this one too, just to suggest that these are actually casting shadows. It's actually going to be pretty cool. Just blurring things up. Clear understanding that these are too subtle with these ones. And actually these shadows are going to be moderately soft, I think, because again the light itself is going to be like the area for the spotlight is going to be relatively soft, and we actually going to repeat this slight softness in almost all areas, because I don't want this direct light. Again, we're not only having this direct light, we're actually having this light too, and these lights, so all these lights will actually affect the sharpness of our shadows on their edges. They're still going to be pretty dark in the occlusion areas, so right here, but yep, still need to look like they actually slightly soften in the particular areas. And also, again, we need to work with the consistency of edges too. For instance, like not consistency, but what I'm speaking of, it's not consistency. I'm talking about the design repetition. So we need to use this repetition even in the edges. So if this light depicted right here with the soft edges, that means that whatever inside this light needs to create slightly soft edges too, because if we're going to create our main light soft and whatever is going to be inside is not going to look soft, it could create pretty strange result. Although, by the way, let's open our 3D thing and see, like, Blender. I just want to see lighting testing, because in lighting testing we actually have this soft edge, but it's soft around, but it's not soft inside. I just want to see how it looks. Let's give it time for the Blender to open. Yeah, right here actually, as we see around this light, it's pretty like soften, but inside not. But the fact that we're going to have the effect of halo, by the way, the effect of halo named calls a little bit differently. I forgot, like somewhere in my notes I saw a different name for the effect of halo. Diffraction. Yep. Probably like this, something like this. Let's just see.
Diffraction.
Diffraction. Yeah, the process by which a beam of light or other system of values is spread out as a result of passing through a narrow aperture or across an edge, typically accompanied by interference between the waveforms produced. So these and this halo effect is just basically going to be that. By the way, where are halo effects gone? It has to be present. Maybe it's present. Yeah. So this thing basically, for the most part, created by the fact that light is too strong and the area that this light is passing through is too small for this light for these light particles to go through in a proper way, and because of this it kind of creates this halo effect, because these particles are just basically spreading out instead of just shining, like passing through, and it creates this the effect of diffraction. But in reality it kind of calls like, just for the most part, artists are calling this effect just the halo effect. You can see this in the, like, when light shines through the thick branches of and leaves of trees in the sunny days, in the like deep forest, and in a lot of different spaces. So that's what I wanted to portray in this particular thing. Basically, we need to create a diffraction field, and because of this diffraction field, again, as you see in this render, it makes our shadows slightly softer. Not necessarily softer, it makes them a little bit lighter, but we could make them softer in order to just support the way how this diffraction is going to work, because they're definitely not going to create diffraction and make it like just a straight line, because it doesn't look like that organic. I'm going to blur it out and make it soft. and to support this softness of diffraction, since this diffraction is soft, that means that whatever light is going to shine through and create with this array of light this cast shadow will make this shadow blurred too, no matter how strong it is and whatever. So I think it's a good way to represent this halo effect or diffraction thing. I hope I'm not like confusing them, because at least in my mind I think they are the same. So the halo effect and diffraction, they're kind of the same. Let's just Google halo effect and see if I'm actually using it right. Not the halo, the usual halo effect. Oh no, actually halo effect is the sun. Oh no, this is probably the wrong thing. I'm seeing halo as a beam of light. Let's call beam effect. And in the Google. Oh. Let's try to find halo effect in the forest. Deep forest. Maybe something like this we'll find. Nope. No. Yeah, like in some places it actually showed the way that I said. So yeah, this thing. No, we're not going to see it. I mean this thing. Like, this is just basically a halo effect. This is halo effect. That's what I mean. Not the halo, which. So this thing, yeah. Because there could be some type of a confusion in the halo effect, because when you actually Google halo effect, it kind of works, it kind of looks like this one, which is not something that I mean. So this is the halo effect that makes the effect on the aperture itself and creates this thing because of the how aperture receives the light. But what I'm talking about is just like what I showed before. Maybe they are different actually, but again, not familiar with different English terminologies for both of these, so let's just call it just diffraction. Let's hope that diffraction is actually, let's just try to find diffraction in nature. Maybe we could find the interesting thing. Maybe I'm not understanding diffraction the proper way either. Meno papo. No. So let's just close our 3D thing. We're gonna have in about like 15 minutes till the end of the session. Let's just drop this diffraction research. It's not super important to clearly understand. So I show you what I mean, and I think you got it. I hope so. We know what we're doing. Of course, this one kind of looks now super dark because I added a lot of darks in here, and of course it's not supposed to look like this, so actually it's to be barely visible. But yeah, I think for the most part we actually depicted all cast shadows and kind of at least analyzed where they could be placed. Maybe not every cast shadow is like placed the proper way, but still enough to probably yeah, they're probably not going to be that invisible. Again, we need to be careful with this. They're going to be slightly blurred, but still clear, like present. Because if I'm going to blur them too much, they're just going to disappear and they're not going to be visible from the far. And they're just going to fuse and not going to be visible. So yeah, by creating these like cast shadows, we actually now created a little bit more depth, and now things are at least seem grounded, so they're not floating. Although it's still a lot of problems in here, but again, this is just a like final sketch. When we're going to work on the final art, we actually going to make things like better. Although I will start with this one as a base, of course, and then I'm just going to correct things that don't seem right based on this, because we still need to use this one in its form, because we put in this a lot of time, and by just disregarding it and like not using it and just like, so we could by the way go two ways how we could use this thing in the future. By the way, let's see how it looks in color. So now we actually added drop shadows and things could look a little bit differently. Kind of cool. With the colors now, actually shadows are a little bit more visible. Cast shadows are more visible than before, which is a cool thing. By the way, there's a brush preset, yes, and the last brushes that I picked, we just could reuse them. So yeah, we could go two ways how we could work with this reference. Like first is to establish our so not using this one as a color picker or value picker. So because there's a lot of separations in here, and ideally we need to clearly establish where these separations go and how they work. So in order to not color pick in here, we just could use these type of charts. We could create charts for each character, which I will do, by the way. Probably not today because kind of 10 minutes left. So yeah, we're going to create local colors for each subject and object in our scene, and let's just call them subjects overall. The same goes for secondary, for tertiary, for additional focus, for each focus. So basically we are going to establish values for everything. That way we're not going to so we're going to have some type of base from where we could just start our rendering, which is always a good thing, because if you already know your base values and rendering, the only thing that you need to do is just to fill your sketch or your line art with these values, and that's it. See how they look at this version. If they look awesome, proceed to the next stage, and now add different values. Like the second pass is going to be the light pass, then it's going to be the dark pass, then there's a lot of passes are going to be. So after we'll go through these three passes. First we're going to create local ones, then we're going to create either light ones or dark ones. We will see what's going to be the most logical thing to do at that point. I don't know, for now logically seems to start with light pass and then add the dark pass, but someone starts from dark to light, so whatever works for you, I guess. Then of course we will add passes. There's going to be a pass for casting shadows, like for cast shadows. There's going to be a pass for probably, of course, like materials, textures, bounced lights, occlusions, and etc. So there's still going to be a lot of things to figure out, but I'm going to go through these stages, not like just I'm going to paint and whatever. I'm actually going to talk about all these phases one by one, and we will go through them step by step, because again, I need to figure out how to work with illustrations in the future the proper way, and I need to establish some type of a process for myself. So if this process will help you, it's awesome. So okay, so yeah, the first way of course is to not the first way, this is probably the thing that we probably should do, I think, or at least I think it's something that will definitely help us to organize things a little bit better, and it's not going to take that much time. So the thing that I tried to talk about, trying to say, is how we actually going to use this one, like overall. Definitely for creating a sketch like final line art, I definitely going to use just line. So the line that we created in here is definitely going to be used to create final line art. So this is like without a question. And then we're going to shape this line art in a better one, make designs a little bit more prominent, much better, because again, these designs like doesn't look that good. They're actually pretty bad, especially the chalk. And to make them better, of course, we can't make them better by working with this pixelization, because there's a limit to pixelization. And for instance, this face is just for the most part a mess, and when we actually will enlarge it and we are going to work on a bigger scale, of course we're going to have a lot more pixels to work with. That means that we're going to create more details, of course. So yeah, so for the how we're going to use the sketch and render, it's just definitely going to cut it, and then just make it super big. In the proper 1080p. So let's assume that this is 1080p. Yeah, and then of course create a clean line up, like above it. So this is the way to work with the line, of course. I think this is the way that I'm going to work with the line, because I wanted to use it directly. This is the direct way that I'm probably going to use. Indirect way is to put this one aside, like we put it in here, but let's assume that this is in the line art, and just create from scratch. So okay, we're looking at here, and we're creating something in here just by looking at it. Like, oh, okay, we have a, oh, come on. We're creating a character in here, but the problem with this method, we kind of need to redraw things, and usually we need to save time, and if we're going to redraw this by looking at it, we're not going to repeat the same thing. And the thing is, we have to repeat things like down to every freaking placement, like, because we worked so hard on this and make this exactly the way it's supposed to be. Every character and everything is positioned to avoid tangents and etc. So that's why we we don't have that much freedom in terms of changing the placement. That's what I call like the complete control, when you start with a particular thing and then you will stay with within a particular thing without going too far from it. And this is something that I definitely like about like my process, because at least when I'm creating my personal projects, I like to know where I'm going. Oh, not good. We erased thing. Just go back. Good thing that I saved. Yeah, probably not going to resave this one. So yeah, and the second thing, of course, again, this method, by looking at your reference and redrawing everything, you will lose a lot of things that you depicted in here, unless you have a super good eye and will place things even better. But again, it will take you a lot of time again, and in order to save time, it's just basically, it's better to use your initial sketch. I wouldn't call it initial sketch, like your final sketch, to work here with your line art. And the same, we're going to work with values, of course. So not this one. This one. Yeah, the same, we're going to probably work with values. No, I don't know. Actually, it's a pretty interesting idea. What if I would work with values the same way? Just copied whatever I have here and try to re-render things a little bit more detailed. That way I could like kept the same feeling without over-painting things. But at the same time, I don't think that this is going to be that good thing, because I don't know. With values, I think we need to repaint things from the ground up, because for this we're actually going to create these charts. Because we could lose ourselves in this pretty quickly. But at the same time, there's a lot of job already done in here. Oh, that's why we can't, because there's a different sketch. Yeah, so because sketch is going to be different, so throughout the whole session we did this basically. So not a lot, but it looks a little bit differently. So at the beginning of the session, the end of the session, beginning of the session, the end of the session, beginning of the session, the end of the session. So yeah, again, by establishing these cast shadows, it actually makes things, of course, much better. So yeah. And of course, still a question how we will. By the way, working with colors is going to be even harder thing to do, because like, okay, we are going to work with values probably this way, by just basically putting these value ranges and then creating them in the proper, just basically render them. But the problem, re-render them. So we're going to use method. This value thing is going to be placed in here, and we're going to basically color our sketch. So assuming this is our final sketch, and we're just going to fill our characters with a different value, local values, and then of course we will start render things slowly. We will add different passes, the dark pass, the light pass, etc. Yeah, so sketching, painting on top, working with value, having our value thing in here, and trying to maintain the same look and feel as in our final value. And with color, Oh, it's a different story with color. So color, we just basically going to repaint everything from the ground up, because the problem with color, it will look completely different. So right here, since this is a sketch, color kind of looks for a sketch moderately normal. But the problem is every object in the scene is going to pick up colors from the neighbor. So for instance, this thing will pick up color from this thing. So that means that there's going to be a slight tint of this color, which will change color information. Values are going to stay the same, but color information will completely change, and this is something that will make this work even more realistically. And color is going to be probably the last pass that we'll go through. So again, but at least I know where I'm heading, which is a good thing. There's always a good thing when you know every step that you need to take. And I'm not going to save. Yeah, so on that note, we'll slowly wrap up the session, I guess. So again, know where things are going to go. Good. So the things that we kind of left with, let's just reiterate and just try to prepare ourselves to the next session. So I established cast shadows for the most part. I think that's more than enough for us to analyze them. No, forgot one thing. I actually forgot cast shadows for this part. Yep, right here actually going to be cast shadows too. But I'm not going to do this now because I don't want to restart the settings. So we actually going to start next session with this. We need to place cast shadows in here and in places where we actually forgot to add them. So for the most part, we're actually done with cast shadows, which is a good thing. Again, I'm not going to depict core shadows in here for the most part. It's not something that we need to do this in this particular thing. We established all values. So next session, we definitely need to do, what we need to do is to figure out every local, just basically finish these charts. Yes. So next session is going to be, for the most part, just finishing these charts. I'm going to put these charts information of what part of the subject. So for instance, red, bomb, chalk, bubbles, then it's going to be created like beaks, for value for beaks, value for eyes, and etc. But the problem is, for every character is going to be its own beak and its own eye value are going to be different, which kind of makes things a little bit harder. Either I need to create a subchart for it, I don't know, make something like this is for chalk. I don't know, we'll think about that. Yeah, so basically for each subject in our scene and for each part of the subject, we need to establish the local values. After we will establish local, by the way, they already kind of established, we just need to put them in the chart. So as we see, let's go with the flat one. Turned off our shadows and our first pass. So for the most part, almost all local values are already established. The only thing that we need to do is just pick them with the color picker and place them in our value chart in the local area, and then create for them light and dark part. And of course, light and dark part is going to be created by analyzing the type of material and its dominant part, which will control low, average, or high range of the contrast. And for the most part, we already did this for our big objects and subjects in the scene. The next session, I'm going to work with this for the small objects like apples, like I don't know, these elements like the suites probably. But for the most part, since we don't have information what type of suites we need to design yet, I think maybe I even create only things that I am sure of, and the rest I'm going to keep for the rendering stage. I think these charts are going to be pretty valuable even in rendering stage 2. We're going to constantly change them and make them a little bit better, I think. I guess that's kind of it. And after we will finish with these charts, for the most part there's nothing to work with. At least like right now I don't know what we could work with more. Established all needed materials. Oh yeah, I forgot reference search. Yes, so final reference search for every type of material that we're going to use. But we actually could do this on later stages because like we already now, without like considering materials, could start to work with final line art. And when it comes down to materials, we're just going to go through the reference search for materials, because in terms of the actual designs we already have all information needed. So yeah, don't think that. So yeah, I think that means that if tomorrow we will actually finish working with charts, and I think we do finish work with them, then we'll probably could start final sketch even from Friday and work on final sketch throughout these three days. Again, this final sketch is going to be in full scale, which is 180p. There's going to be a lot of details in our illustration, as we see. Like, it's pretty complex illustration, and the fact that we're actually going to not just overpaint this or overdraw this, but at the same time we're going to think about new designs that we did in here, and at the same time we're going to try to place them in a proper perspective. By the way, about perspective, we definitely need to establish our horizon line on the higher scale too. This is something that I actually tried to answer at the beginning. When I worked with the perspective, I knew that we need to somehow translate our perspective into our by perspective I mean the pivot points that we're going to use, because if we're just going to be referenced by this one, we're not going to be able to add new elements of the perspective. So that's why we'll probably need to retranslate or translate perspective into full scale too. So let's just write things down, what we need to do next session. By the way, I already somewhere tried to write what we had to do and I can't forget about it. Need to design. That's what we had worked on. So yeah, next things. Next. Next. What's going to be next? So first thing, not in a particular order though, but why would you put numbers if you don't want to put them in a particular order? So first thing we need to do to finish charts, value ranges. So finish charts for all value ranges. There's a lot of them. Again, it's not going to be that hard of a thing to do. After we will finish charts for value ranges, the next thing that we need to do is, okay, while I remember it, translate perspective or transition. Let's call it translate for now. Perspective. in a big scale. Yeah, translate perspective in a big scale. For the most part, 1080p. Because right now perspective is actually placed in here, and we need to translate it to 1080p. Actually, it could be relatively easy thing to do. We could just basically crop up this thing. It will make this perspective either stay at this place or it's just going to be placed somewhere in the bottom. We'll see how it's going to work. But if not, it's pretty easy to actually translate perspective. Understand the distance between points, pivot points. I don't think this is going to be a problem. What else I talked about? Perspective, materials. Come on, already forgot. Finish charts. Cast shadow, final check. Just call it check. Just check off the cast shadows by adding these that I forgot about them. That's kind of it though. Again, reference search, but reference search I'm not going to go through reference search because we are going to dive into a final sketch, and we're still going to use a lot of references to actually design. So basically design things. Yep. And start final design, which kind of works with line art. So yeah, that means that we're almost done, which is a good thing with this stage. I probably could call that we actually ended the 6th stage with lighting, materials, design to the sketching, because for the most part we actually did. And like again, last session of lighting and materials design is going to be the next one. And starting from Friday, I think we could start final sketching or create final designs, which is going to be a super cool thing to do though, because now I need to work accurately and not just like, yeah, I need to create proper dynamic inside each sketch, not just like the overall dynamic, but dynamic inside too, and designs for these things. So this is definitely going to be a super hard thing to do. There's going to be a lot of redrawing, a lot of frustration probably, because it's not easy. And yeah, on that note, we will end this session. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Have a nice day or night. And by the way, my voice is kind of done. Yes. And yeah, have a nice day or night, and see you in the next session. Are we? Definitely. Bye bye.